In this lesson, we'll take a quick look at MoGraph in Cinema 4D. So a really important part of Cinema 4D that you're going to want to take advantage of is called MoGraph. So if we take a look up here in the menu, you can see that we have a MoGraph item, and there are just a few options in here. We're going to take a look at one of the most used objects in here, and that's going to be the cloner. So let's go ahead and open up a cloner. We'll add a cloner object. You can see nothing's been added. We need to actually add an object to use with the cloner. So in this case, we'll just start with a simple cube. So we've got a cube primitive. Let's drop it inside the cloner object. So now, if you take a look at this, it's hard to see what's going on. It looks like just a tall cube, but it's actually a few cubes inside this cloner. So if we go and select the cloner, you can see that these are actually overlapping. So what the cloner is doing is copying the cube in a specific configuration. So we'll select the cloner and go to Object. Let's kind of move this over. And so right now the mode is set to linear. So it's cloning these in a linear fashion. We've got the count, so we can set the number of clones that we've got there. Okay. And then if we come down here, we've got the position, the scale, and rotation. This is how many units are between here. So we go ahead and increase this amount. You can see that we now expand that out, and we're getting clones of these cubes. Okay, we can also go in here and do scaling, so that scaling in the Y. So you can see that these are actually scaled down more than these are. Take that back to 100. We can do rotation. Okay, and you can see how each one is rotated a little bit more as it goes up along the cloner. So with this, you can create some really interesting effects, and you can actually see all of these options, all these attributes are animatable. Now under mode, we can change from linear to radial. So looking at radial, we can change the radius here, and now you can see that we can create those clones along a radius. We can change angles. If we don't want to do a complete circle, we can change angles here. Okay, change the count. We can also do a grid array. So rather than having that in a straight line or in a circle, we can have it in a grid. We can use these handles to change the size of the grid there. Pull this out. Okay, and the nice thing about this is that we're still just using one primitive object, so that if we were to create a grid, and let's change the count to maybe, let's go maybe 10 by 10 by 10. Okay, and then we can come in and modify this so that we are getting some space between our cubes here. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and add some space at the top. So we've got this really big grid of these cubes, but if we want to change the look of the cubes, we're only working with one single cube. So in this case, we would just select our cube primitive and let's say add a fillet to it. And you can see that all of a sudden all of those cubes get that same fillet. We can go ahead and change our radius here a little bit. Make it a little bit sharper if we want to just round the corner off just a bit. Okay. And all of that is taken into account when the cloner creates our grid. Now we can also affect the cloner objects here. So let's go ahead and choose, instead of a grid array, we'll just we'll keep the grid array actually, and we'll just change the count in the Y to 0. Okay, and so what we'll have is basically just a flat grid, and we'll go ahead and decrease the amount of space between those. Okay, so we've got this sort of tile effect. If we want to take the cube and decrease the size in the Y, you can see how that takes that into account. So now we've got these kind of flat tiles. We can decrease our fillet radius. Okay, go ahead and add a new material and just change the color. So let's maybe do yellow or orange, something like that. And we can add this to our cloner. And so now we can actually add objects to affect different elements of this cloner. So even though we're just working with one object, so we'll go into MoGraph and let's go into effectors and let's just create a plane effector. And so again, we're not really seeing anything, only in the objects manager. So we'll go into the cloner, and the last tab here, you can see that that plane effector has been added because we have this selected. If you don't see it in here, if you want to remove it, you can go ahead and drag this into the effectors window. Okay. So then we select the plane effector and we go into parameter, and this is telling Cinema 4D what we want to affect on this. And so this is saying we want to actually move these clones in the Y 100 centimeters. Okay. And so right now we don't have any fall off for this effector. So we'll go to fall off and let's add a spherical fall off. And let's increase the size here. And as we do this, you can see how some of these start to raise up. So only inside this plane effector are the clones being affected in this way. So anything inside the plane effector is being moved 100 centimeters, but it's falling off based on a cylindrical fall off here. Or I'm sorry, a spherical fall off. If we go under filter and turn on deformer, we can kind of see that fall off a little bit better. Okay. And so one of the cool things now is the fact that we can move this plane effector through our clones. And you can see how those raise up and move back down again. Okay. Now if we wanted to change in the plane effector the parameter and make it instead go up 200 centimeters, we can do that. Okay, if we also want them to rotate, we can turn on rotation and start to rotate them in different ways. Okay, and so taking our plane effector now, going through this, you can see that as it comes into the influence of the plane effector, the position and rotation changes that we've added are instituted based on the fall off. And then as it moves out of the influence of that plane effector, they go back to normal. So you can create some really interesting effects in here, and MoGraph is going to be a very powerful way of doing that. Now your cloner object is going to be kind of the basic element that you'll be able to use, but there are a number of different types of effectors. You've got random effector where you can add some randomness to your clones. You've got spline effectors where you can clone along splines, and so this is definitely something to take a look at. We have several courses on using these types of cloner objects and effectors to actually create interesting effects like this. Okay, and there's a lot more that's involved in MoGraph. These are kind of the simplest elements to go through and show, but just to give you an idea of the kind of effects you can get. And this is just using basically 3 different objects here and really just one piece of geometry, this cube, to create this effect. And then you could, if you wanted to animate this running through this piece, you could certainly do that. Okay, so that's a quick look at just what MoGraph is and how you can begin to use that with your project. So the next thing that we want to talk about is working with body paint. So with Cinema 4D we have a body paint, which is a very popular texture painting program, and so we'll take a quick look at that in the next lesson.